Greetings everyone, this is Ohio Dan. This video is going to be titled something like Getting Your 10%. And in this particular video, this is just my own way of psychologically processing things around me. This may or may not work for people that are listening to this. This is just a consideration that I'm throwing out there that I personally find useful, but it very well may not even work for some of you guys. But there are content creators, Stardust most prominently, I think, within the men's community who believe that none of the choices that we make in life really matter, that free will is just completely an illusionary type of thing, or everything is predetermined based on genetics. And then there are others also within the men's community that believe we have a great deal of freedom to choose our destiny and that self-improvement is key, and basically that free will is the most important thing in terms of guiding what we do in life, in terms of the choices that we make for ourselves. And so there's a wide variety of dispositions when it comes to this. Some people think, like Stardust, that everything is basically just predetermined by genetics. Even things like work ethic are pretty much determined by things like conscientiousness and whatnot, where you have other guys that basically have the position that we determine our own fate. We walk our own path. We make our own decisions. And my belief is that while much of what we do is determined by genetics and forces outside of our control, I think that there's a good argument to be made that a lot of stuff that happens to us, we don't really have control over. But I do think we also have some amount of free will that can factor into the results that we see for ourselves in life. And I refer to this process as getting your 10%, because I do lean more toward the idea that we are not in control of our own destiny. Our genetics do indeed determine a lot of what happens to us, our environment, things that we don't have control over with our family, from the time that we're born through childhood, opportunities that we may not have based on socioeconomic status. Your position in life is a lot luck as far as I'm concerned. Now, maybe a lot of you guys disagree with that, and you lean more toward the self-improvement can overcome basically everything way of thinking. But I think that we only have really a narrow scope of decisions that we can make that actually have some sort of meaningful cumulative impact in our life, or even impact on a single topic or thing that we're trying to accomplish. I believe that 10% is probably about, roughly speaking, the amount of things that we really have control over. The other 90% of stuff that goes on, it just goes on, whether we fight it or not, whether we enjoy it or not, whether we lament it or not. A lot of things in life just happen. But I do think there is that narrow scope. You could argue whether it's 10% or not, that we do have discretion over, where we can have an impact. And I recognize the limited influence we have in changing our environment, while realizing that it's important to focus on the things that we can actually change. And this works for me basically because if I'm going to have a positive impact on whatever it is that I'm trying to do, I got to score 10 out of 10. Right? If it's a borderline situation where things could truly go either way, in terms of success or failure, or getting what you want or not getting what you want, if your goals are reasonable and you're focused on the right things, that 10% can make all the difference. But then you have to get that full 10%. If you only get 5% because you half-assed something, that could make the difference between success and failure. And that's the way that I've tended to look at this recently. This is a new idea, and I'm illustrating this as basically a new idea on my end. But that's what psychologically motivates me. I may not have the ability to overcome all the challenges that I'm facing. Some things may work out for me without even trying, if I'm lucky. If luck is on my side, I may get what I want and not have to even deal with something negative. But it's important to focus, from my point of view at least, that 10% of what I can do, and basically get that full 10% to work out favorably for me. And if the rest of it goes to shit, then that's just what's going to happen. Or if I was going to succeed anyway, that's great. but my focus is on that limited scope of things that I feel like I have some control and some purview over. So rather than give in to despair because you're black-pilled and you think that nothing matters and you have no control over anything, or exaggerate the amount of control that we can have by thinking you can just improve everything and overcome your bad genetics, more or less, and overcome your bad living situation, for example, or the crappy job that you have to work that you're kind of stuck in because other opportunities are just not there for you. Rather than basically being in despair because of that or pretending that you can just overcome these things with positivity, I find it important to apply ourselves to our daily circumstances as much as possible in order to maximize the positive effect on our individual outcomes. In other words, getting your 10%. Maybe you could argue, in some cases, if you really pour all of your energy into something, maybe it's 15%. I don't know. But really, if we're looking at it honestly, I don't think you have control over the vast majority of things that happen to you. I think that's delusional. I think people tell themselves that so that they can feel better about situations. But in reality, there is that small percentage of things where we can actually make a difference in our own lives and the lives of other people, in my opinion. So it may indeed be true, and I would argue that it probably is, that the supposed amount of influence we have over our daily life situations is much exaggerated compared to the impact of genetics and circumstances beyond our control in the environment. But this makes it more important to maximize how well we can capitalize on the situations in which we can exert some influence. That means that we have to focus, as I've said, on the things that we can have some control over. Getting your 10% involves both recognizing our realistic limitations as humans while doing whatever we can to make our impact count based on where we can be effective, as opposed to having unrealistic expectations or not trying to improve because you don't think that you can basically do anything at all to change your circumstances or to accomplish anything. I think both of those extremes are unhealthy, even though I do lean more toward thinking a lot of things are predetermined. But here's the thing, guys. Even if it turns out that you want to argue more of the black pill perspective, that control is an illusion, that perceived control at any level is really just a fantasy, that we are just a product of our genetics and everything's going to play out the way that it's going to play out anyhow, I find that working hard to maximize the control that seems to be there, the apparent control that we have, is the best strategy in terms of psychological motivation. So in other words, ironically, even if you want to make the argument that free will is just not a thing at all, you're probably going to end up doing less in terms of applying yourself to things than someone that at least believes they have free will. And so there's kind of a paradox there of, well, if this person's not as successful because they don't think they have free will, does that prove that free will actually exists? And of course, the problem with all this is you can't do a comparative analysis. Unless you can time travel and change a person's perception and see if that had a different result than if you hadn't changed that person's perception, it's pretty much impossible, as far as I can see, to prove whether free will exists or not. But I think it does. I've noticed that when I've given up and whatnot, I have worse outcomes than if I try to strive to do as much as I can do with the 10%, roughly speaking, of things that I can actually have an effect on. And so that's my conclusion with this, guys. I don't know whether this is useful to a lot of you guys or not, but this is something that I find seems to be having somewhat of a positive effect. Again, it's not drastic because I don't think it can be drastic. I don't think you can change most of the things about your environment and your life, at least not in the short run. And frankly, tomorrow you could get up and get run over by a bus. There are so many things that you don't have control over that really there's not much you can do about, although I guess you could look to see if there's traffic coming and so that you don't get run over by something. But again, you never know what's going to happen. You might get lucky. Some things may work out in your favor that you never thought were going to work out. Other things that you thought you had going on that were positive may crumble into dust. But I do believe that if we focus on the right things, that there is a small percentage of things around us or within us that we have some control over. And that to me is what's important to focus on. I find that to be personally the healthiest place for me to be psychologically. And maybe that can work for some of you guys as well. Getting your 10%, making sure that you're scoring 10 out of 10 on the things that you can control, and everything else is going to happen the way it's going to happen. It's not really sensible to stress out over that stuff. What you have control over is, did you really try? Did you actually only score 3 out of 10? And that ended up being the decisive factor because you didn't put forward your best effort. For me, psychologically, doing as much as I can and trying to have that limited positive impact on whatever it is that I'm trying to do is a valuable thing. And maybe some of you guys can make use of that as well.